Good day, everyone. My name is Jessica Porras, and I'm the Senior Manager for Education and Outreach at CAQH Core. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to our virtual dialogue with Humana. In a Q&A fashion, you'll hear about their experience implementing the Phase 4 CAQH Core operating rules and becoming Phase 4 Core certified as a beta tester. They're in the process of becoming Phase 4 Core certified. But before we begin our session, I would like to mention a few logistical. You can download a copy of today's presentation from the CAQH.org website. To do so, navigate to the Core pull-down menu at the top of the CAQH.org welcome screen and select the Core Education Events page. A link to the PDF version of the presentation can be found under the listing for today's webinar. On this slide, you can see a screenshot of the attendee GoToWebinar dashboard. You should see something that looks similar to this on the right side of your computer desktop. When joining today's session, it's possible you may have joined the audio portion of the webinar using your computer speakers by default. If possible, we would prefer you to join the webinar audio by telephone. To do this, please select the telephone audio button in the audio panel of your dashboard, and the dial-in information will be displayed. Make sure you enter your audio PIN, which is found under your dial-in information. We will save time at the end of today's program dedicated to responding to audience questions. You're encouraged to submit your questions at any time during this webinar by typing them into the questions panel on your dashboard. We would like to thank our guest speakers from Humana for joining us today. We will introduce them formally a little later, but would like to extend our appreciation to Kim Peters, Process Owner of Provider Process Implementation, as well as Melissa Vowles, Program Manager for EDI Implementation, both from Humana. Today, we will start off with a brief overview of the Phase 4 CAQH Core operating rules, as well as ways to get started with implementation. We will then get an update of Voluntary Phase 4 Core certification. After that, we will have Kim Peters give a Humana company profile and begin to walk us through why they decided to move forward with Phase 4 implementation. Then, in a Q&A format, we will talk to our guest speakers in more detail, as well as some of our core colleagues, about their Phase 4 implementation experience so far. What drove the decision, how they went about planning, and how it's going, both good and not so good. And we'll save time at the end of the session for your questions and comments. Now, I would like to introduce our first speaker, CAQH Core Associate Director, Erin Weber. Erin?
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to give a quick overview of the Phase 4 operating rule requirements and some of the resources that are available to assist you with your implementation. The Phase 4 operating rules were approved in September of 2015 for voluntary implementation. They address 4 separate HIPAA-mandated transactions: prior authorization, claims, enrollment, disenrollment in the health plan, and premium payment. All of the requirements included in the Phase 4 operating rules are infrastructure in nature. Many of you are probably familiar with infrastructure requirements because they were included in the Phase 1, 2, and 3 operating rules as well. They address things like processing mode, response time, acknowledgments, real-time acknowledgments, and real-time processing, connectivity, system availability, companion guide templates. And for some of these transactions in particular, there are some unique requirements specific to the transaction. So an example is with the claim infrastructure rule, there's a requirement to include guidance in your companion guide on your requirements for coordination of benefits, and that's to address some of the challenges the industry has had with that. On the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the reasons to consider implementing the Phase 4 operating rules now. It'll help to establish you, and I'm sure Kim will speak to this as well, as a leader in the industry as an early adopter. You have the benefit of making your own timeline rather than having to adhere to a mandated one, as with past phases of the operating rules. You're demonstrating your commitment, your organization's commitment to admin SIM, and you're building on work that has been done in previous phases. So as I mentioned, many of the requirements in phase 4 apply to the transactions in previous phases as well. So you've already probably invested in some of the build to implement these requirements. On the next slide, there's a lot of value that comes with implementing the phase 4 operating rules, particularly related to saving resources. The response time and acknowledgement requirements ensure that nothing goes into a black hole and that providers are informed in a timely manner. Your staff is going to spend less time verifying information over the phone. Providers will immediately learn if their claim submissions were successfully received by a plan and moved into the adjudication system. Providers can immediately learn whether a plan has received and is reviewing a prior authorization request. The safe harbor ensures a common method of connectivity across different trading partners. Finally, coordination of benefits is improved through both the companion guide requirements I mentioned before and requirements for more timely eligibility information from the health plan. We have several different tools available to assist your organization in implementing the operating rules and really just also assessing whether or not you do want to implement these operating rules. As with previous phases, we do have an analysis and planning guide for the phase 4 operating rules. And the analysis and planning guide includes 3 separate tools. The first is a stakeholder assessment, which helps you understand which of the operating rule requirements apply to your system. Then there's an impact and system assessment, which helps you understand which systems, both internal and those that you may outsource, are impacted by the rule requirements. And then there's a detailed gap analysis tool, which is literally a spreadsheet with every single rule requirement listed out. So you can map that against where your systems are today and identify what remediation may need to take place. In addition to the analysis and planning guide, we have over 100 phase 4 FAQs up on our website, and we're adding more every day as we see questions come in on these sessions and through our request process. And finally, just to highlight kind of the steps you want to think about as an organization as you go through this process. So first, you want to assess the rules. The rules are available for free on our website, so that's the first place you need to go to take a look and see what the requirements are. Then you need to engage your internal resources. One way to engage internal resources is attend these education sessions and learn more about the rules themselves. Perform the analysis. Use that analysis and planning guide to understand what steps you need to take to be in conformance with the rules. Make the adjustments to your system, engage your trading partners, and coordinate certification planning, which we'll talk more about in a minute. There's a number of tools available for certification planning, including some websites and e-learning tools that we have within CAQH. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Taha to talk much more in detail about the core certification process. Taha?
All right. Thanks for the introduction, Erin, and good afternoon, and thank you all for joining the webinar today. So today I'll be talking about the value core certification brings to the industry and provide you all with this peek into phase 4 core certification, which is expected to launch in the fall later this year. First, I'd like to provide you all with an overview of what core certification really is. The core certification is really the gold standard of what a certification program should look like. The main reason being is that the core certification program is a certification program designed by the healthcare industry for the healthcare industry. The certification program is unique because it was designed with a set of checks and balances to assure it as the most robust and recognizable program of its kind in the industry. First, the requirements for testing, that is the testing that all entities must meet in order to be considered conformant with the operating rules, were agreed upon by over 140 participating organizations, which of course represent a wide array of stakeholders across the industry. Additionally, the core certification programs and policies were also agreed upon by core participating organizations as well. Second, a third-party testing vendor, otherwise not affiliated with CAQH Core, actually does the testing. And lastly, CAQH Core administers the program and reviews the testing results and applications according to a robust process and policies, and we ultimately award the core seal. So this next slide shows the 4 main stakeholder categories that an organization can be awarded a core seal for. As you follow each row, you can see examples of entities that have become core certified. As of today, we nearly have 300 certifications, and I would like to take a moment and congratulate those organizations that have achieved core certification. And if any of you out there are curious to know if your trading partners or vendors are core certified, or you would like to see just a complete list of core certified entities, you can visit www.caqhcore.org and go to the core certified organization section of our website for a complete list. Here's a slide that shows the different type of stakeholders that can become core certified. As you can see, there are a variety of organizations that cascade into the broader CAQH core stakeholder categories. Core certification has a broad market outreach with adoption by many of the largest commercial plans and coverage support for a large percent of the Medicaid population. As many of you rely on your business associates to help you conduct these transactions, if those business associates are helping you, you probably can find them categorized as a group on this page, and we encourage them to become core certified. This slide provides an overview as to why core certification can be beneficial to your organization. You can highlight many of these benefits when making the case to pursue certification to leadership as to why it would be a good business decision. Further, the slide also demonstrates what type of benefits you should expect from your various vendors or clearinghouses as a matter of course. As Aaron pointed out, the Phase 4 operating rules are completed and are being implemented by those early adopters. Voluntary core certification for Phase 4 will be offered this fall, and similar to Phases 1 through 3, Phase 4 will apply to health plans, providers, clearinghouses, and vendors. So we encourage those that are already core certified and those seeking to pursue core certification to get the complete package and become Phase 4 core certified. Phase 4 core certification will help to fortify your organization as an industry leader and pioneer, and as you'll be ahead of the industry movement and not left behind. Currently, Phase 4 certification is in beta testing, and we'll be hearing from one of our beta testers, Humana, later on, who is currently in the middle of the testing process. But before we begin our conversation with Humana, I just wanted to show you all a visual of what the Phase 4 certification test site looks like. So on your screen is a screenshot of the registration and login portal for Phase 4. So for those organizations that have completed Phase 1 and 2 or Phase 3 testing, the Phase 4 testing portal will have a very similar user interface and look and feel as you experienced with prior phases. After you've created an account with the core authorized testing vendor Edifex, you will have to complete testing tasks specific to your organization's stakeholder type, and also dependent on how you conduct the transactions as well. In case your organization wants to get ahead of the curve, these testing tasks are based on the test scripts outlined in the Phase 4 core certification test suite. You can view these testing requirements now via our website to better prepare yourself for Phase 4 core certification once it goes public to the industry later this fall. If you would like to learn more about Phase 4 certification testing and be provided with a detailed walkthrough of how the testing platform will work, I'd like to invite you to join us next Wednesday at 2 p.m. For a webinar with Edifex. And next, I'll turn it over to Drew for our polling question.
Great. Thank you very much, Taha. And now this brings us to our first of 2 polling questions that we have for our audience today. And the way this will work is I will read the question and then I will launch the poll, and you'll see on your screen the poll will appear, and you can take just a brief moment to log your response. So this question asks, what is the furthest stage of implementing the Phase 4 CAQH core operating rules are you voluntarily planning to complete by the end of 2017, so the end of next year? So this question requires a little forecasting, but you'll see there that there's multiple options to choose from. So go ahead and pick more than one if they should happen to apply to you. So we'll just pause for about 15 seconds for everyone to log their response. We'll take about 5 more seconds. In which case I might have Taha and Aaron provide some analysis based on the results. So I'll close the poll and share the results with everyone. And so the largest percentage, 44% of those that responded indicated at least that they're going to do some sort of internal education and awareness. And granted, there are multiple choices that people could have made. 33% said analysis and planning or systems design. 31% saying that they don't plan to voluntarily implement in that year, I should say 2017. 20% saying deployment and maintenance, and 18% saying systems implementation and integration or testing. So Aaron or Taha,
sure.
What do you make of these results?
It seems like a majority of the attendees are either in the internal education or awareness or they're planning. So I would recommend you to kind of look at all the various resources that we have online, whether attend our webinars if you want more education and awareness on phase 4, or again, analysis and planning. You know, as Aaron mentioned, we do have an analysis and planning guide to help you through the implementation and kind of see what remediations your system may need when implementing the phase 4 operating rules.
And if I could add something to what you just said, Taha, you mentioned next week's webinar with EdFX, but I'd also like to remind the audience that we've done a series of phase 4 webinars throughout the year, and they're available. The recording and the slide deck are available on our website if you'd like to go and review some of our prior webinars.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And so now, I would like to introduce our 2 guest speakers from Humana. First, I would like to introduce Kim Peters, who is the process owner for provider process implementation. Kim oversees all EDI data receipt and transmission for Humana and manages a team of 20 associates who work with providers and internal Humana teams to analyze and resolve provider EDI issues. He works extensively with WEDI and X12 to provide direction and oversight for Humana interests related to new government regulations. Kim is also responsible for all HIPAA complaints and X12 transaction compliance-related projects. In addition, Kim directed the team responsible for Humana becoming core phase 1, 2, and 3 certified, and now they're working on phase 4 certification. Our second speaker from Humana is Melissa Vowles. Melissa is a program manager for EDI implementations at Humana. She has been with Humana for nearly 5 years and has a transaction processing background of over 15 years. Melissa led Humana's project teams for both Core Phase 2 and Core Phase 3 certification seals, and now she's also working on the Phase 4 project. So now, Kim, please start us off with a Humana company profile and take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kim Peters, and I'll give you some background on Humana. If we go to the next screen, there we go. Humana has been in existence for over 50 years. I haven't been here quite that long. I started in 1986, so I've seen the way that the company has transformed itself many times over the years. We are currently dedicated to lifelong well-being, looking at how do we keep members healthy and how do we keep them active in life. It's a financially stable company, number 73 on the Fortune 500 list. We are multifaceted. We do commercial, individual Medicare, Medicaid, and specialty benefits, as well as concentrating on well-being of the members. Next slide, please. Why become core certified? That is the big question, and when I first got involved with core certification, my upper management wanted to know why we should go down this rabbit hole, and you know, with myself and my boss, Sid Hebert, we had been attending WEDI and X12 for quite a few years, discussions with the people at core, and we were able to justify what the benefits of going core certification meant. Several things are involved in it. One is, according to the legislation, there's 2 ways to prove that you are HIPAA compliant. One is to be core certified. The other one is an attestation statement. And we chose to go core certification because it has a very defined set of testing rules and outcomes that, you know, I think is the industry standard and that is recognizable across all payers and providers. So we thought that was the best way to go. It's, in my mind, better for our customer service. Once you are certified and you can actually stand up your systems and you're able to process according to the data content rules, it gives you a better presentation to the provider community. And Humana, back in '91, I think when we first implemented our HIPAA transactions, we took a stance that we were going to go ahead and implement all the transactions at the same time. So we've always had all HIPAA transactions in production in a real-time mode, other than the 820 and 834, the only two that are really in a batch mode standalone. But the rest of them are all online real-time transactions, as well as a batch input for those customers that can't submit online real-time. So when it came to core certification, it wasn't a question of why we should do it, it's just how soon we should do it. We see better provider satisfaction. I think we are seeing a better standardized delivery across the industry. It gives you a little bit better foundation for your future projects. The certification at Humana in March of 2009, we were phase 1 compliant. March 20th of 2013, under Melissa, we got phase 2 certified, and October 9th of 2013, which was very short order, we got phase 3 certified. So that was a very good accomplishment for Humana. And we were the first large health plan to be core phase 3 certified, which I think helped us to get ready for the next phase, which is phase 4. And it's a little bit better selling point once you've proven you can do this over and over without major impacts. Next slide, please. Project planning resources. This would vary depending on your application and how you've implemented your transactions at your company. The one benefit we have at Humana is when we put our process together, we standardize the way that we interact with our HIPAA transactions. So we've got a single input and a single output for HIPAA transactions. Therefore, all of our delivery mechanisms are managed in one spot. That gives us a benefit because when we go into figuring out what do we need to do for compliance and certification and all that different functionality, we've got one area to look at as far as how do we deliver the data. Now, we may have other impacts downstream where the actual data is processed, the adjudication, the eligibility and benefits and the plans are set up that may impact how you deliver your transactions, but we still have one delivery mechanism that allows us to be able to concentrate on how do we certify our product once we get into that process of core certification. So in the beginning, we had to identify all of our necessary resources, go out and find out all the different areas that are impacted when we deliver a transaction. So you've got your benefits, you've got your eligibility, your enrollment, and your referrals and offs, and all those different transactions that come from different parts of your internal systems that you have to think about when you're starting to build a process to become certified. As phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 started building on additional transactions, we had to look at different pieces because as you got into phase 3, you had your remittance advice, your payment transaction that had to be considered in with the EFT and your other payments as far as your claims and all that. Phase 4 gets into your claims and your other transactions that are named in that legislation. And why we felt like we would be happy to be a beta tester is because, like I said, we've had those transactions in production operating under the same scenarios as our phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 transactions. So it was an easy lift for us to figure out how do we go into the testing phase for that. I think some systems or some companies may deliver some of the transactions out of different parts of their organization than they do other transactions. So you may have to look at how do you approach that compared to what you've already certified for 1, 2, and 3, whereas Humana's got a centralized way to do it. So it didn't seem like it was anything to worry about on my side, since we're dealing with the same interfaces. Understanding capabilities, roles, and responsibilities. One of the things to look at is who do you need involved within your certification process? Who do you need to have pulled in and available whenever you're doing your test suites and figuring out how do you analyze or diagnose problems? And anytime you're going through testing, you're going to run into a few roadblocks or bumps, wherever you're trying to execute a transaction that has not gone through a test suite before. So not that your transaction is not working the way it should, but maybe you find something that doesn't execute as you expected it to do. So, you always have to work some of those bumps out. And we've always had really good response from CAQH and their technical experts over at EDIFAX. So it's always been a very good experience for us, and I would recommend it. I really view it as a positive for both the payer, the provider, and for the core administration, all three, because it takes us a step closer to standardizing the way we do business in the industry. Next slide, please. Jessica?
Yes, thank you so much, Kim, and thank you for starting us off with this company profile and this really great overview of how you got started with Phase 4 implementation and certification and the reasons why. And now I'd like to take us to the next segment of this webinar, which is more of a dialogue with Kim as well as Melissa Bowles, and we'll also be joined by Aaron and Taha from CORE. So, Kim, my first question for you was going to be, what are the advantages that you see for Humana being the first company out of the gate? But you did a terrific job answering that question already. So, I mean, if there was, one main reason, or, you talked about how you guys were sort of set up to do all of the transactions and you wanted to, be proactive as opposed to reactive, but what would be sort of the main reason that you could, give to the audience listening why they should do this?
Well, Humana's always tried to be a leader in the industry as far as trying to figure out what's the next best thing we need to be doing out there in the healthcare industry. And by being at least one of the first, if not the first, in core certification, I think it shows that we're actually willing to step up and do something to change the way the healthcare industry is moving. And I'm very passionate about my job as far as this part of it, and trying to figure out how do we move it to that next level and make it better for our members. We're all members when it comes down to healthcare. So, the first job should be how do we take care of our members first. If we take care of our members, we take care of our providers, then the companies are automatically taken care of in my mind. So that's one of the reasons I go for core certification, because I think if we standardize the process across the industry, we've got a better product and everybody wins.
That's great. I mean, that this is all, a source of passion, and that your company's so mission driven. That's great to hear. Kim, you did a really nice job of describing your process, getting ready for Phase 4 implementation and certification. I'd like to pull the thread a little bit more about, how you got leadership to buy in to doing this with, I'm sure, resource constraints and challenges and priorities. So how did you go about doing that?
Well, one of the things we did was we started looking at some of the industry initiatives within CMS and the legislative side, where they're starting to levy fines on privacy and security, and they've actually started looking at transactions. And so we did a calculation based on what the exposure is, and we said, well, what's the best way to protect Humana from that exposure? And when it came down to it, we felt like core certification would give us a better argument if we had to go to court and say we were doing the best job we could. And to prove that, we went and got core certified and verified with the industry that, our processes and our systems were doing as they were asked. Now that doesn't mean that 100% of our transactions are always going to be 100% accurate. Every once in a while we'll have a system hiccup or we have something go down and you're going to have an exposure. So I think the industry recognizes that, and as long as you're doing your best at trying to be a good citizen, I think the CMS and everybody else recognize that is going to work with you. So that's our main emphasis on becoming core certified, and then as well as becoming standardized across the industry, and working with other payers and providers to figure out what's the best way to get the data back out there so that everybody gets the information they need in order to satisfy that medical event, so that the members and providers are taken out of the middle of the process.
That makes sense, and it seems like a very sort of reasonable thought process. Why you're doing this. My next few questions are going to be a little bit more on the kind of the nitty-gritty of implementation. So my question is, I think for Melissa, did you encounter any challenges during the early implementation planning stages?
During the early stages, we really didn't have any challenges. We started the discovery phase when we were fresh off of core phase 3 certification, so we had our SMEs. They were actively engaged. As a team, we took a look at the transactions, and we really felt like we were in a good place to obtain core phase 3 certification with minimal to no IT effort. I will say that Humana has been fortunate in that our SMEs have really remained the same throughout each of the phases. So we've been fortunate and lucky that we go back to the same group of people each time, and that's helped us move quickly through these last few certifications.
That makes sense. That way there's not, a huge learning curve every time you have new staff. Were there any, did you use any of the core implementation resources, or were there any that were sort of more helpful than others during those stages?
Time flies, and I took a look back through my notes, and we started prepping for core phase 4 in late 2013, early 2014. So at that time, we really didn't have any resources. But since then, we have looked at the documents, particularly the gap analysis tool, and then from the testing suite, the Quick Start Guide are the two documents that we've referenced repeatedly. So if I was going to take a step back and look at this from someone's perspective that's just starting out, I would recommend most definitely that gap analysis document. That would be a great place to start. And then as we've encountered questions or issues when we've responded to the test cases, I know we refer back to that gap analysis tool because it provides a better understanding for us of what's being asked. It gives a greater level of detail, and it's good reference material for sure.
Melissa, this is Erin. That's awesome. And one of the things I was thinking about when you mentioned your timeline of when you were, starting to do your assessment of the phase 4 rules is that was actually at the same time the rules were being developed, which I think is really interesting, and a good point to highlight for folks is that not only is Humana an early implementer, but your team was very closely involved, as were, about 140 organizations that participate with CORE on developing the operating rule requirements. So at the same time, the industry was setting the requirements, you all were looking at them from the perspective of, is this a reasonable implementation effort for our team, and what is the ROI to us? So I just want to highlight that parallel thinking that you all were doing at that time, which I think is great.
That is great.
I got to give kudos to Kim Peters. I keep thinking if I hang around with him long enough, his expertise will rub off on me.
Well, that's why we're recording him. My next question is for Erin. Listening to what Kim and Melissa are saying, and the reasons why they're implementing the phase 4 rules, does that resonate, or is that what you've heard from other stakeholders you've talked to?
I think absolutely. I think many of the reasons that Humana has mentioned, and I think the other one I want to highlight that I've heard from others is
the importance of setting a national set of expectations around infrastructure across all of the HIPAA transactions. So as I mentioned before, we already have these infrastructure requirements in place and mandated for eligibility, claim status, and electronic remittance advice. So Phase 4 really builds on that early initial investment and adds similar requirements to these additional 4 transactions. So I think both feeling to be a leader and wanting to do what's best for your members and the providers you work with, in addition to setting these expectations across the industry with your trading partners, I think is really the key to what's driving a lot of these early implementations.
Erin, as we heard on the poll that there's some folks here that are kind of in the early phases, and there might be some listeners here who this is their first Phase 4 webinar. So for those people that are kind of trying to figure this out, how should they get started?
I think it goes back to what I highlighted on, I think, that last slide I reviewed, which is become familiar with the operating rules. It's really easy to access our resources, so pull them out, take a read. There's a lot of background information in the rules, too, on why the requirements were selected and valued by the core participants. So I think that'll give you some good background on the purpose of the rules and how they will help improve your business processes. The other thing I want to highlight is and Kim and Liz mentioned this, you can always talk to us. We really see operating rules as an integrated model. So not only does CORE facilitate the development of the operating rules and the certification component, we see education and ROI and driving adoption as also a critical part of our mission. And so we're always available to help folks move through the process, whether you can send us an email at core@caqh.org, you can look at our FAQs. If you have a lot of questions, we're happy to set up a call with you. So there's a lot of dialogue that happens back and forth.
That's good to know that for people that find this a little bit daunting, there's something they can do to get some questions answered and get started. The next couple of questions, I'd like to talk a little bit more specifically about Phase 4, voluntary Phase 4 core certification. So for Kim or Melissa, why did Humana choose specifically to be a beta tester for Phase 4 certification? What were the benefits in doing it like that as a beta tester?
Well, when I looked at Phase 4 operating rules, and I was involved in some of the discussions, or a lot of the discussions early on when we were discussing what rules should actually apply, I knew there was a few changes in the way things were going to happen. So I wanted Humana to be out there and experience it firsthand to figure out, is our system going to have issues, or are we going to see hiccups whenever we implement the process? And if we are, I want to be out there and be ahead of the game and try to figure out how do we solve those problems and get our systems as quiet as possible before we implement it, with a wider audience. Like I said, I want to be standardized across the industry, and the one thing that I saw or I know of that is a little bit different between Phase 1, 2, and 3, and then Phase 4 is the security protocol. And I knew that in the back of my mind with my IT background that if you put a new security protocol in place, there could be issues with firewalls and this and that. So I wanted to make sure that we had already experienced that and figured out what we needed to do to accommodate for it before we move forward. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to be a beta tester. I think it's worked out well. As we've said already, that EdFX and CAQH is very willing to step up and work with us and figure out where those issues are. How do you overcome them? Is it something we need to work on our side? Is it something we need to work on the interface? Or where is the actual issue and how do we overcome it so we can move forward? Again, there's a lot of benefit for the industry. The process is pretty well self-explanatory when you're actually going through the certification. The testing suite is actually gives you step-by-step, how do you start, how do you actually execute test cases, where do you go for help and all that. So, I don't see it being a difficult process to overcome or a difficult process to go through. It's just a matter of make up your mind to get started and move forward.
So I think Melissa might have talked about this a little bit earlier when you were saying that you were sort of getting ready for this, soon after becoming Phase 3 certified. But what, Melissa, so what steps did Humana have to take to remediate your systems in order to be in compliance with the Phase 4 operating rules and get ready for beta testing?
Well, now I'll kind of jump in here because Melissa and I work together, and what we had to do is work together with our IT counterparts and figure out who all is going to be involved in the actual test suite. You look at your transactions, you look at your systems and where those data sources are coming from that are going to be delivering your transactions to certify under the core suite. So if you're going through Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3, or Phase 4, you've got different transactions and different processes you need to execute. So you need to have somebody available from each of those different areas in case you run into an issue. And usually the people doing the testing are on the business side. But you have to have your IT counterparts to help you through when you run into an issue. You say, okay, my transaction is not going through. What's causing this issue? And you identify a data content issue. You have to back into it, figure out where that data content is corrupted. How are we going to fix it? Is it a system-wide issue, or is it just a data issue that the way the data was loaded, that kind of stuff? So, having the right resources definitely makes it go easier.
Yeah, that makes sense. That there are people with different backgrounds, and they kind of all fit together to make this process go smoothly. That's really helpful to hear. So during the certification beta testing process, what's worked well and what have been the challenges?
Melissa, you want to take that one?
So if you've done core Phase 3 certification, it's very similar to that. Someone without an IT background like myself can move fairly quickly through the process. You're going to upload screenshots from your companion guide or response logs. It's pretty easy to do. You're just copying and pasting. You have to practice patience in this day and age where we all expect immediate gratification. You don't automatically get a response back. You've got to wait 24 hours. But that's clear in the startup guide. You go in, you set your expectations, knowing that it's that kind of a time frame. And maybe I need to get a life, but it is kind of fun each morning to look to see how you're progressing, to see if those test cases you submitted have been reviewed and approved. Something, and we've alluded to it a couple of times, an issue that we're having has to do with testing some of the transactions. We're familiar with a download, upload process to test transactions in the past, and certain transactions in core Phase 4, that option is not available. But I will say that when we log the issue, either a response from Edifex has been given the next day, or even in one instance we had a phone call set up, a conference call was immediately set up with Edifex and CAQH and Humana, and we feel like as a group we're actively engaged in resolving the issue, and there's been good communication throughout the process. So it's just all part of beta testing, and hopefully the lessons that we learn during this process will make it smoother for anyone that follows us.
Right.
And since you mentioned lessons learned, for those that are listening in, again, trying to think about, Phase 4 certifying as soon as it goes live, I mean, besides what you've already mentioned, are there any other lessons learned to share with them or tips?
Well, the only thing I would say is that, make sure you do your analysis up front. Look at your transactions. Look at the history of your transactions. If you're having issues with your transactions currently within your production environment, you want to understand those before you go into core certification, because most likely you're going to find those same issues in the certification, because it's going to go through a HIPAA compliance validation when they actually go through the transaction to make sure that your data content is in the right place, it's following the HIPAA rules, and you're actually complying with all the implementation guide standards.
That's very helpful. So I'd like to ask Taha a question, since he's our certification expert in the room here from CORE. So are there any unique considerations for an entity that's thinking about phase 4 certification? So for example, should they have certified for the first 3 phases before going through phase 4, or does it vary by stakeholder?
Yeah, so sure. First, I'd like to kind of build upon what Kim and Melissa were talking about as far as kind of certification testing for phase 4 and the considerations to think about. So phase 4 builds upon the foundation of phases 1 through 3, and test scripts for phase 4 cover many of the similar infrastructure requirements found in the previous phases, but are with different transactions. And I think Kim touched on one consideration to think about is kind of the connectivity requirements for phase 4 as these build upon those that are seen in prior operating rules. And with that, I would recommend looking at our phase 4 analysis and planning guide, which should help the organization go through a detailed operating rule and requirement analysis to evaluate any current gaps with your systems and processes. And other considerations to think about, if you're a health plan and you're looking to become certified in phase 4, I like to point out that you must be core certified on phases 1 through 3 in order to be eligible for phase 4 certification. And if you're a clearinghouse or a vendor and sell a specific product or service that is for phase 4, then you may be eligible to apply for phase 4 core certification without having to complete certification on those earlier phases. So if you believe your organization falls into this category or have any questions on, if you're eligible for phase 4 or not, please, feel free to contact us at CAQH Core, and we'll be glad to confirm your eligibility.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to thank Kim and Melissa from Humana for taking part in this conversation with us. We appreciate, your candor and your spirit, and I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Erin and Taha, for being part of this as well. And now I'll send it over to Drew for a second polling question.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for that great dialogue. And this brings us to our second polling question. And just like last time, I'll read the question, then we'll pause very briefly for everyone to log their results, and then I will share those results. And this question asks, do you anticipate your organization will become phase 4 core certified? And we'll make this next year, since 2016 is kind of rounded out, so through maybe the end of next year. And so I will launch the poll, and we'll pause very briefly for everyone to log their response, and then we'll move into our Q&A session.
And Taha, you mentioned that this would go live sometime in fall?
Yeah, so sometime later this fall. So, we'll make a public announcement on our website and send the distribution emails once the certification site is ready to go live.
Okay.
And I'll put in a final plug. You'll see at the end of the webinar slides here, we have a phase 4 certification webinar next Wednesday with Edifex, the testing vendor, to go into the details.
And you'll actually get to peek behind the curtain and get kind of not a live demo, but they'll have some screenshots of what it will look like. So it's a preview.
That's right. All right, so I will close the poll and share the results. So 38% are unsure, and it's good to see that you're reaching out to us by joining us on this webinar, and I hope we cleared some of the questions up for you. 28% saying yes, 18% saying no, and 18% saying not applicable to their stakeholder type. And with that, I would just say again, hope to see you at our webinar next week for more information. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jessica to begin our Q&A session.
Thank you, Drew. I'd like to remind you to submit your questions by typing them to the questions portion. So the first question is for Humana, and I'm not sure whether to send this to Kim or Melissa, but here's the question. Knowing what you know now, what would you approach differently?
Well, I don't know that I would approach anything differently. I may have taken a different stance on how I would have approached my upper management in the beginning, because I don't think in the beginning we had the full management backing that we should have had. I think once we were able to show the benefit and the risk involved in the penalties, I think we were able to move forward. But you know, in the early stages with phase one, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of penalties going on in the industry, so there wasn't a way to argue that fact. But once they started implementing the penalties with privacy and security, it became evident that, you know, it was more advantageous for us to become certified, whatever the best method of showing that Humana was being compliant.
Thank you, Kim. And, you know, here's another question that I think is for you. You know, it looks like there's, you know, people are wondering what part of Humana you guys sit in so that they can kind of understand, you know, when they're going through this process, you know, how to organize and put together resources. So what part of the organization do you sit in?
Well, we are reporting up through the business side, and we interface directly with the IT. We're the front end of the company. We bring in all the electronic transactions, and we deliver all of the remittance and payment advice. So it's a little bit different in our company than some other companies maybe, where Humana, and I like to, you know, use this analogy for our internal people, that our area actually controls the cash flow for Humana, because we bring the transactions into the company that actually cause the actual payments or the claims adjudication, and then we actually deliver the payments back to the providers that, you know, gives them their money to satisfy the member's medical event. But we also interface with all the internal systems, because anytime there's a change within our environment, we have to stay in the loop, because most of those internal system changes are going to generate some kind of a change to our transaction process, since we administer all the different transactions. I don't know if that answers what they want.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think, you know, that helps to kind of clarify, you know, what this questioner had in mind, and, you know, also kind of explain a little bit more about how Humana is organized. So the next question's a little bit more specific to phase 4 certification. So what is the anticipated duration of phase 4 certification testing? Do we know that?
So we're currently in the beta process right now. So Humana is one of our beta testers for certification testing. So, you know, we'll get a better idea of the sense of duration, but I can kind of speak to kind of building up past phases and how phase 4 is similar to phases 1 through 3. And we've seen organizations complete testing between 2 to 6 months. And with phase 4, we do have the phase 4 core pledge, which allows your organization, gives you a 180-day time frame to complete core certification testing once your organization submits and pledges for phase 4.
Thank you, Taha. And so here, another question for you. If you know the answer is, you know, do we have any sense of the increase in the transaction cost or the cost savings as a result of phase 4 certification?
Yeah, so that's a good question also. So CAQH does publish a report called the CAQH Index that kind of estimates the potential cost savings that some of the phase 4 transactions have to the healthcare system. You can go to our website, www.caqhindex.com, and kind of view that report. I think also, I believe that there's also a cost savings calculator on our website, so you can actually enter the number of annual transactions that your organization does and kind of see potential cost savings with moving to electronic for some of those transactions.
That's really helpful. And, you know, I've been here over a year, and I did not know we have that. So I'm looking that up, the calculator. So the next question's for Aaron, and I think, you know, some people would just, you know, have a little bit of curiosity about what's in the phase 4 rules. So could you talk about the operating rules for prior authorization and what the status is?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about one operating rule for prior authorization, and that's the infrastructure rule that's included in phase 4. As we announced on our town hall a couple of weeks ago, we are starting an initiative here to look at additional opportunities for prior authorization through operating rules. So internally, we are accumulating a catalog of potential opportunities, and shortly we'll be forming an advisory group of core participants to vet that list and then send out a survey to the core participants to help prioritize those opportunities or help us know if we've missed something. And then by the end of the year, we'll be planning to launch a subgroup to start developing additional prior authorization operating rules that may address things like data content and other things that came up during initial rule development, but just, the industry wasn't quite ready for. We really needed that foundational set of infrastructure requirements first. So more to come on prior auth this year. And if you're interested in getting involved and you are a core participant, keep your eyes and ears open for emails, particularly the survey later this fall. And if you're not a core participant, I would encourage you to join so you can contribute directly to that rule development process.
That's really helpful, Erin. And we also have a another town hall scheduled in November, and those are the forms that we use sometimes to kind of give the updates on what's going on with core. So register for that webinar as well. And so I've got a final question for Taha. So why is testing required for core certification? What is the value?
So the value of testing, testing is important in a sense that it helps to verify that your systems are actually conforming with the operating rules. Being able to do that transaction-based testing kind of verifies that your systems have implemented the operating rules correctly. Additionally, testing as part of the core how the core certification developed was developed by the industry by core participating organizations that represent different industry stakeholders who developed a set of testing requirements for core certification. So it's kind of the industry kind of moving forward and kind of applying those components to core certification. So wanting those components to verify that across different stakeholders that systems are indeed up to par.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you, Taha. So I think it looks like we're out of time today. I'd like to just share in the next slide a couple of takeaways from this webinar and these takeaways are really as we put together this material, the sort of the key points that we're trying to get across to the audience. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. As usual, a recording of the session will be available on our website in the next 24 hours, and we'll send you a copy of the slides and the recording at that time. In addition, here are our next several webinars. Next week on Phase 4 certification. In the early October, we're going to be talking about the core code combination process and how Anthem has changed their systems and their governance in order to get the most out of their denial management process. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a town hall in early November. In the next slide are some resources that we'd like you to explore, and if you do, we would value your feedback because we're trying to develop new content and want to know what actually helps more than others. On the next slide are some ways to connect with us. You can check our website, check our email, and with that, I just want to say thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.